How's it going, everyone? It's Tavi from Weather Sponge 1000, and in this video we're going to determine when and where Tropical Storm Danielle will develop in the Atlantic. So we've been talking about the possibility of Tropical Storm Danielle for the past several weeks, and we're going to determine where are the possible areas we could see Tropical Storm Danielle within the next week or even beyond that in the very more long-term future. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the GFS model, and one feature that I'm taking a look at right now is this feature right here, which is very far out, I will say, around 240 hours out, but we do see a little bit of a low pressure system develop in the Gulf of Mexico. Now this area of convection is pretty much going to be a derivative of this current tropical disturbance we're watching in the main development region. So I've been talking about this area of convection for the past several videos, but it seems like there's going to be a little bit too much dry air for the time being in the main development region for this area of convection to have a pretty high possibility of developing, because there's just going to be a lot of stable air that's going to inhibit enough convection for Tropical Storm Danielle to develop under those conditions. But we do see that while there is a lot of stable air, the moisture still stays around, and it's going to continue to move westward to a point where it could enter the Gulf of Mexico, and once it does so, it's going to experience warmer than average sea surface temperatures, potentially could experience lighter wind shear and a higher amount of moist air and a less stable environment as it enters the Gulf of Mexico, which is certainly a possibility. And the GFS model does identify a low pressure system developing right around the Gulf of Mexico by right around 10 days from now, entering the early part of August, where we do see this low pressure system develop in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, of course, this low pressure system is very weak. The GFS model isn't necessarily giving low millibar pressure with this low pressure system, but there is that possibility that maybe this area of convection could be a little bit more powerful than the GFS model initially is anticipating with this, depending on how much wind shear and dry air this low pressure system will experience as it heads into the Gulf of Mexico. If I were to show you guys the 700 to 300 millibar relative humidity forecast by the GFS model in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, we do see that there's going to be a lot of convection associated with this tropical wave moving through. But look at how much dry air that's going to be just to the north and west of it. It's going to be too much for this convection to handle, and this area of convection is going to entrain too much dry air for enough convection to really see the pressure get low enough for the winds to get strong enough for tropical depression or storm to develop. And we see this low pressure system pretty much dry out in the main development region in the midst of this very stable and dry air. But we could see it enter another moist environment as it heads towards the Gulf of Mexico, where we do see the air in the mid-levels becomes a lot more moist. So we could see maybe a rebirth in the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen that a lot of times, and in fact, some of the most powerful hurricanes come from rebirths from tropical waves that were struggling in the main development region. A perfect example is Hurricane Katrina, which pretty much up until it reached maybe the Bahamas, this storm was always struggling to even develop into tropical storm status, and it finally made landfall as a hurricane in Florida and then just exploded in intensity as it entered the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, Hurricane Harvey also struggled on its way towards the Gulf of Mexico before again rapidly intensifying as it headed towards the coast of Texas. Two of the most costliest disasters in U.S. history. While of course I'm not at all implying that we're gonna see another Hurricane Katrina out of this, but it's I just want to show you guys that it's always possible that even if a tropical wave does struggle in the main developed region, and as it heads west through the Caribbean, it could easily have a chance of developing into a tropical storm or hurricane or even major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, but there's still a lot of days for us to iron out the forecast, so we're just gonna need to wait and see if the GFS model does expect that the air mass around the Gulf of Mexico will become moist enough, and we'll see just enough instability to where maybe a low pressure system could form. The European model isn't expecting that at all. It still expects dry air to pretty much swallow up that moisture, pretty much diminishing any chance this low pressure system develops as it heads towards the Caribbean. We do see the moisture move through the Caribbean, but then as it enters the Gulf of Mexico, the European model is expecting a little bit too much dry air for this moisture to handle and for this area of convection to really develop a small and well-defined center of circulation. So as a result, the European model isn't forecasting a tropical storm or even a well-defined low pressure system in the Gulf of Mexico by next week, but we still have to wait and see. Now, in terms of the other possibilities where we could see Tropical Storm Danielle, there is potentially that possibility right around the southwestern Caribbean. Of course, there's still a pretty hefty gyre going on right around the Central American region, which is typical for this time of the year. Right now, it's considered the winter season for a lot of Central America by how much it rains and cools down the temperature, of course. So maybe we could see the possibility of a tropical disturbance develop right around the southwestern portion of the Caribbean, but we still have to wait and see if there's any sort of definitive forecast that really suggests that tropical storm will develop. Right now, we're just seeing a lot of convection move through Central America, but not really anything that's developing into something that's anywhere close to having even a possibility of developing into a tropical cyclone. So we're just going to need to wait and see over the next several days. Right now, we are in a positive MJO pattern, so a lot could definitely change. A lot could definitely change, and plus there's typically a lot more stability during a positive MJO, so it is inhibiting tropical cyclone development for the time being, but that could change depending on when that negative MJO pattern, or at least an average MJO pattern, comes in, which could happen as early as next month, believe it or not. So we're just going to need to wait and see. And in terms of other tropical waves we're watching, I was talking about this tropical wave over the past several days, but it seems unlikely we're going to see enough rotation and enough convection for a tropical storm to develop under the midst of this dry air. So nothing really is expected to develop in the main development region. We're just going to need to at least pay attention to the Gulf of Mexico by next week, as well as the Caribbean over the next several days, because maybe we could see a small low pressure system develop out of those areas. Now, take a look at what the GFS model is forecasting when it comes to where low pressure systems will develop. We do see one spaghetti model want to develop quite a strong low pressure system just to the west of Florida, which is definitely something very interesting. And we do see a couple of ensemble members wanting to take this south of the Caribbean, developing a low pressure system as well. So as of right now, there isn't really anything certain when it comes to where Tropical Storm Danielle will form, but there is potentially that possibility into next week in the Gulf of Mexico, so we're going to need to pay close attention to that. And take a look at the MJO forecast over the next several weeks. Of course, right now we're in the negative MJO pattern, so air is a lot more stable. There's a lot more sinking air, which means that conditions are a lot more favorable for tropical cyclone development. But if we were to take a look over the next few weeks, we do see that the MJO pattern transitions more into a positive MJO pattern, which will allow for a lot more lift in the atmosphere in the Atlantic, which is unfortunate because this will occur right in the heart of the hurricane season, which would definitely be a concern and could potentially make for much more active than usual August and hurricane season in general for the 2022 season. And now, in terms of my forecast of what are the areas to watch, so in this area, I'd say it isn't really much of an area to watch anymore. There's too much stability for a tropical storm to develop. However, as this low pressure system moves into the Gulf of Mexico, we're going to need to pay attention to that within the next 8 to 10 days, because that will be another area of convection that could potentially develop into a tropical storm depending on the conditions. So something to at least be aware of in the Gulf of Mexico and the southwestern portion of the Caribbean. But Yeah, guys, I guess that's it for this video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and I hope you guys all have a good day, as I'll keep updating you guys every single day when it comes to weather and the Atlantic hurricane season.